Welcome to New Education with Isha and Danny.
Isha, welcome back to nuut-ed. How are you going today?
I'm awesome. Happy to be back in the studio.
Same. Now, we've got a really good topic today. It is plant versus animal protein for muscle gain. Because you hear a lot of things out there that, you need to be eating red meat to put on muscle. That's all you can be eating because otherwise everything else is not as good. But we're going to probably set the record straight, sort of few things out for people. So
Debunk a few myths.
Exactly. So can you first tell me though, what is the difference between plant protein and animal protein?
Yeah. So like the name suggests, animal protein is basically any animal product or animal byproduct. And you're looking at things like meat, poultry, seafood, and dairy products. Whereas plant-based protein comes from a range of plant sources, and notable ones include things like legumes, grains, nuts, and seeds.
Okay, so then which one would you say is better for muscle gain?
So basically, animal sources of protein are complete sources. They contain all 9 essential amino acids, whereas plant-based sources of protein are usually incomplete sources, so they're usually lacking in 1 or 2 of those essential amino acids. And compared gram for gram, animal sources of protein contain more protein than plant-based sources.
Okay, so then you're saying that, there's more complete proteins with animal protein. Does that mean it's necessarily a better quality protein all the time?
Yeah, so usually animal sources of protein are considered higher quality because they contain all those essential amino acids in optimal portions. However, that's not to say that plant-based sources of protein can't be good quality sources. You've just got to be really smart in mixing and matching your plant-based sources to create a complete amino acid profile. And to make this kind of easier to visualize, I think we'll make maybe a post on this so people can see which amino acids come from which plant-based sources so they know which ones to combine.
Okay, and then what about the bioavailability of the protein sources? Are they the same?
Yeah, so generally, again, animal sources of protein tend to have better bioavailability. And one exception is soy, which is equivalent to animal sources. And this is because many plant-based sources of protein contain a compound called anti-nutrients, which basically inhibit the absorption from these protein sources. Again, our plant-based friends don't have too much to worry about because that absorption is only reduced by around 10 to 20%. So I wouldn't really be concerned unless you're not meeting your protein targets.
Okay, so another thing I want to know is both these sources of protein, do they have the same nutrients? Because we always hear you need to have a nutrient-dense diet and from whole foods. Am I going to get the same effect if I eat, red meat versus eating tofu?
Yeah, so some notable nutrients in our animal protein include things like vitamin B12, vitamin D, heme iron, zinc, and omega-3s. Only little downside I would say is that animal proteins tend to be higher in saturated fat. On the other hand, plant-based protein is usually higher in dietary fiber, vitamin C, and antioxidants, with the only little downside being that there aren't many plant-based sources of vitamin B12. And if you haven't checked out our vitamin B podcast, I'd recommend that you do that now because in there you'll see some really good sources of plant-based vitamin B12.
And that's why we hear that most people on a plant-based diet might need to take a B12 supplement, which is totally fine to do.
Exactly.
Because you're hitting all those other nutrients with the plant-based diet. So it's not a downside and you can make do.
Yeah, you can. And whether that's through supplement or dietary changes, it's definitely possible. So don't think that being plant-based means you can't hit those targets.
Okay, and before you mentioned one amino acid called leucine. Now, what is that?
So leucine is one of our essential amino acids and it has a crucial role in stimulating muscle protein synthesis, and that's exactly what we want for gains, right? So in comparison to plant-based sources, animal protein sources have a higher concentration of this amino acid leucine.
Okay, so what does the research say? Which type of protein is better for muscle gain?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of research around this topic, some with contradicting evidence. One study I found said that soy protein actually resulted in lower muscle protein synthesis rates in comparison to things like whey, milk or beef protein. However, there were also some hero studies for plant-based sources. One study found that a plant-based diet which included whole foods and a soy supplement, was just as effective in supporting muscle strength and muscle mass compared to a diet which was omnivorous, so had mixed whole foods and a whey supplement. So this just shows that, of course, there's a lot of research out there and it's still going on, but generally the findings are that plant-based sources can be just as effective as animal sources when it comes to muscle gains.
Okay, and so as a nutritionist, what would your top 3 tips be for someone who's on a plant-based diet that wants to grow muscle?
So my first one would be combining different sorts of plant-based sources throughout the day to ensure that you're not only hitting your essential amino acid targets, but also getting leucine from lots of different sources as well.
So can you give me maybe a couple of good foods that you'd recommend?
Yeah, so one example could be having brown rice with black beans in a burrito, or having peanut butter on whole grain toast. So really little simple things like that, but you can see how you're combining sources there.
What's another tip on muscle growth then from eating a plant-based diet?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, bioavailability can be a problem, but there are lots of different processes and cooking methods that you can do to kind of get the most out of your plant-based sources. And this includes things like sprouting, soaking, or fermenting to kind of get the nutrients out so that when they're in the body, they're better absorbed.
We always hear that with beans and legumes. It's really good to soak them, right?
Exactly.
Rather than just having them straight from the packet.
Yeah, so anything that you can do to increase the bioavailability in your body.
Okay, and then what are some other tips you would say then to help people grow their muscle?
Yeah, so like we discussed today, there's so many different factors that can influence muscle gain. And unfortunately, contrary to what Instagram says, eating lots of protein is not going to equal muscle gains.
Don't just eat protein is what we're saying. Don't just eat a diet of chicken because it's not going to help you.
One does not equal the other. Unfortunately, in an ideal world, it would. But one thing I haven't mentioned is resistance training, such as weights training.
Or Pilates.
Yeah, exactly. So anything that's going to promote muscle protein synthesis through muscle hypertrophy, which is basically where you're breaking down your muscle fibers and then you're using amino acids from your diet to rebuild those muscle fibers. And that's basically what equals to gains in a short way of explaining it. And then also continuing to do progressive overload, which is increasing your weights or intensity, is what's going to continue that muscle growth as well.
And another tip I want to share, I guess, is that there's really good whole food sources of both animal-based protein and plant-based protein.
Yeah.
But then if you need an extra top-up, especially if you're doing that resistance training, a protein powder is always really beneficial. And we've spoken about this a lot.
Yes.
And nuut is also a great one to do because nuut, as a plant-based protein powder, actually has all 9 amino acids, doesn't it?
That is correct, yes. From both pea protein and pumpkin seeds as well. Combines the two.
So that's also very important to look out for because a lot of those plant-based proteins out there don't have all 9. So then it's really not going to help you at all. So if you're going to top up with a protein powder, we don't recommend just having protein powders at every meal. You'd need those whole food sources. But if you're going to top up for a protein powder and are going for a plant-based one, look for one with all 9 amino acids, just like nuut.
Exactly. What more could you ask for?
Well, thank you, Isha. That was a really good episode. I think, we talk about a plant-based diet and we're not saying that you have to go vegan or avoid all animal protein, but we're saying there's ways to hit your target and not solely have to have animal-based protein, isn't there?
Exactly, that's right.
All right, well, thank you for joining us. We'll see you again, I guess, next week.
Next time,
I'll have another great topic for you. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, watching us lovely faces. But if you please like and subscribe, it really helps us. And send us a message and let us know what you want us to talk about because we're always looking for new topics.